Hi, parents, and welcome to Picking Teams, a playbook for parents. Today, we're back with Karl Hedley, Academy Director at Gwinnett Soccer Association. So, Karl, how long have you been coaching?
I've been coaching for just over 17 years now, collectively. It
Okay.
really doesn't count the little bit I did when, again, at Coastal, when they'd have camps, I worked camps. And
Sure.
that kind of got me into it originally. And when I went back to England, did a little bit, but very, very little. It wasn't until I came back. It was actually when my oldest daughter started playing when she was 8 or 9. I think the frustrations of watching the rec coach drove me crazy. So I was watching her like sit back on the top of her 18-yard box. And I'm sitting there trying not to say anything because I know it's right until the very final game where I spoke up and said, "Get out, get up, step up." And a few of the parents turned and went, "Could you coach him next year?" So that's kind of about that even started. That was back when the Gwinnett Soccer Club was around. So that was because I don't know whether you know the story of the merge, but the Gwinnett GSA were two separate things. So that got me. So that was about 17, 18 years ago.
Okay.
So I've been at GSA since then. So whatever, Tequila into GSA, a couple of years in the rec program, and then hired on to be an academy coach, and then not soon after the academy director. I was the girls' academy director for a while, believe it or not, which I don't know whether I meshed well with girls, but then a few years later became the boys' academy director.
And you played professionally too, right?
So I played in England in the local lower leagues, non-leagues in the Liverpool area. I originally came to the States in, I think it was 88. Played in the Myrtle Beach area, like I told you a story, with the intention of going to Coastal. Headed back to England in 1990 with the disillusioned idea of becoming pro. And then played in the lower league, semi-pro, before calling it a day. I had a little bit of a back injury. And honestly, it was getting to the point that the lower leagues in England, like, every game was a fight. And I mean a physical fight. And I just wasn't that type of player. I wanted the ball on the ground. I wanted to knock it around. And every time, back then, it was lump it forward, kick it as far as you can. And then every opportunity they had, there was a scrap, like a physical fight. And I got fed up with it. So between back injury and all that, I just stopped playing for many, many years. Probably 6 or 7 years had nothing to do with the game. But again, you're talking about like being in an environment where I was going to Anfield to watch Liverpool regularly, just immersed in the game, which most kids growing up in England are. It's everything. It's all you ever. People say, when they were kids, they wanted to be doctors, lawyers, or football players. Most of the kids, me included, that I knew only wanted to be soccer players. There was nothing else. We didn't know anything else. I mean, my favorite player that lived just up the road from me, I knew his license plate number by heart. Like, it was my passion was to be him. And that's all I wanted to do. But again, the downside is what happens with school, right? That was the crappy part of it all, is that school got left as a secondary, whereas I could have been doing more and getting a better education and so on and so forth. So, and by the way, I've been with the 13s, 12s, 13s, 14s in sort of that age group. I've been doing those in that age group since the 2005s were U13s. 7 years, 8 years of probably 8 years of being in the U13 age group.
What was it that made you switch to the U13 age group, or the 12s, 13s, 14s?
It was actually the merger, I think, because I was doing. I'm trying to think if I was the girls' academy director at Tequila, and the girls that I had an older team, so I'd like the 97s, I think it was, and then the 2002s were the younger team. And we've done quite well. The 2002s had done quite well. We'd actually beat GSA at State Cup, who were ranked number 1. It was Judson's team. Judson and Campbell were there trying to win State Cup, beat them in State Cup. And then I think it was just a topic of conversation, like who's going to take the boys when they merge. And knowing Nuno from when I was younger, I think he put an influenced word in and said, I want Karl to take the U13. So that was actually the first year of boys ECNL. So the U13s 2005 were the first year of boys ECNL.
Okay. All
So that's
right.
why it's important to try and get that right, So
Yeah.
I'm just a big fan of always doing the same ages, just because I think you start to know the kids. I know that they can't make an early training session because of bus getting in off the, for middle school, and I've got an idea when testing is, and you start to understand the moods and the buttons of
Yeah.
the kids that you can push, and like your son's a prime example. I could push his button all the way, right? But then the kid sitting next to him, you couldn't necessarily say the same things. And I think that goes all the way through adulthood. But I think the temperament at a younger age is more important, because you lose a kid quickly if you're offensive to him, or you point him out at the wrong time and embarrass him or whatever. Kids exactly like Miles, you can do that with, but other kids you have to kind of. So I'm a big fan, and my academy set up the same way. Is every year the lead coach remains the lead coach. Staff coaches may move in between up and down, but the lead coach gets to have an idea and a philosophy of what those ages need and what they don't need, what works, what doesn't work. And by the way, it's easier for coaching because I have a curriculum that I just keep repeating.
Yeah.
Tweaking when it works and when it doesn't work. So it actually makes it a lot easy. Session plan tonight. Look at the date. What we're working on. Hit print it, and I've done it 100 times, so it helps. But yeah, that was the start of the boys' youth. It was also, by the way, the same year Atlanta United started.
Okay.
So it was the getting used to how do you deal with. I've got 14, 15, 16 players, top players going into U13, because we did a pre-season combined session, but 3 or 4 of these might go. And that year a lot went because they didn't have an academy. There wasn't any. So, it was the 2005s where I think we had 4 went, 2006s 2 went at the time. So it was a lot to deal with because we'd never had to deal with that before. It never
Right.
And since then, I've seen a massive change in the boys' side, by the way, which is a good topic of conversation, because I think it's a completely different setup and entity that it used to be. It used to be exactly the same as the girls' side. In fact, the girls' side was probably more important because girls' football or girls' soccer in the States was more popular. Since that, it's changed completely. I mean, it's massively changed. I think the boys' side is more popular now. The pro games change things dramatically. Kids want to go to Barca Academy, wanting to go to Spain, and it's just, I talk to Drew at the club all the time. I'm like, we've got to figure out how maybe we need to run this boys' side just a little bit different, because these kids, up until the age of, I mean, you probably, well, you will know way more than me. Up until the age of about 16, maybe even 17, they couldn't care less about going to college. They couldn't care less. And then they hit 17 and go, oh, crap. I'm not going to make a pro. I'm going to need to go to college. And by the way, the odds are dramatically reduced, right? Like these odds now of kids going with these MLS Academy kids coming over, and foreign students still, they're in the 1% and 2% to go play.
Correct.
AA. It's small numbers,
Right.
and then what they don't realize is the pro numbers are even smaller.
Right.
It's definitely, the mindset has changed on the boys' side. And I think it's completely separate now from the girls on the way we run things. So that's been a massive change since the 05s to now, when I'm dealing with these parents of these U13 people who are just like, every single one of them want to go to Portugal, want to go to Spain, want to go to Barca's Academy, or they just think if Atlanta United's not spotted them, it's Atlanta United's fault or our fault, and they need to go somewhere else and find it. Completely disillusioned, but
well, that's the thing. Like, and this is what I always say is like, and I'll give you a personal story about Miles. You mentioned him earlier. So Miles was struggling at the beginning of this year, and he, for the listeners that don't know, my 9th grader is at Atlanta United, and he sustained an injury during his first year there that caused him to miss about 5 months of the season. He came back. He worked really hard this summer to come back, came back in the fall, and wasn't getting any playing time. These kids, mine included, are used to that instant gratification of, you do this, you get that. And it happens just like that. They're not used to having to really work for something and the time that it takes to actually achieve the goals that you've set for yourself. So in any case, he had this conversation with me. He said, if I'm not playing, then I think I should just look to go somewhere else. Like, let's just go to St. Louis and play for Kansas City. Because that coach talked to him when he was at ODP when he was like 11, right? So he thinks that's still an option that's on the table. And he also thinks that as his parent, that I would drop everything to move across the country for him. Right. And he got the cold, stark reality conversation from me, which was, if you can't make it here at the program that's down the street, then we're not going anywhere else.
Yeah.
It's not Atlanta United's fault that you're not starting. This is, and it's not your fault either in a lot of ways. I mean, and you can't help an injury, but after an injury, it takes work to get back. And that's what you have to embrace, is that work. And if you can get there, great. And the happy end of the story, I will say, he is getting back and getting his playing time now. And he's certainly not singing that same tune.
Personally, what I think you've done there is what my biggest critical point towards parents is you've allowed adversity and asked them to deal with it, right? Which is what most parents don't do. It's, you've got a problem, you've got an issue, let me fix it for you.
That's right.
And if you look at most top pros, and I haven't gone and polled most top pros, but in general, and you can even look at the very top, you can look at the Messis and the Ronaldos of the world. There's a adversity backstory in there somewhere for those people who remember David Beckham, released because he was too small. The amount of times that happens with players. Messi couldn't grow, poverty area, all those types of things. I had a friend of mine who ended up playing in the Premier League for Aston Villa years ago, and was in the street, average, but above average, strong, fairly tall, quick, a little bit quick. But his adversity was he had a bad home life. Like, he just wanted to get out of his house. So he had that adversity, and his parents were never going to help him deal with that because dad was a drunk and all these things beat him. And the adversity was the goal was to get out of that house and do something in his life. And he had no other skill and trade. So he literally worked and found himself in the Premier League at 28. But his goal was to drive within, was to get out of where he was, the situation where he was. I'm not saying for 1 minute that parents should create that kind of home life for adversity, but there's so much out there. Let them get put on a second team. Let them not start. Let them not have great minutes. Have them go ask the coach what they can do to get more minutes. It's that simple. Parents don't need to go and ask the coach.
Absolutely.
It's constant with the questions and the wanting to understand why their player's not playing. And the worst one is, you always play your favorites. It's my favorite one of all time. That isn't it funny how my favorites are the better players. They're all better players. Let the other ones work to achieve what those players have got, right? And whatever it is. And by the way, if you don't like the coach, there's going to be another one right around the corner. So you can go and impress the next guy. But you've got to learn to deal with you go sign it. And again, you'll know way more about the college scene than I do. You go sign a 4-year deal at a college and you go off. And then within a week of being there, the college coach gets fired and you got a brand new guy in who doesn't like you. Or you get a roommate that doesn't like you. Parents can't swoop in and deal with these things. They've got to deal with it on their own, and they've got to learn to get over it and get over the adversity. Unless they're in danger, let them get on with it, because there's going to be issues and they're going to have problems, and they're going to have problems they need to solve on and off the pitch, by the way, in any sport for me. But you look at the conversation you've had with Miles. Where are we moving to do what? What is it we're trying to accomplish? Just to say we played at a pro academy? Because that tends to, it all of a sudden, it tends to identify you as who you are. You are Jim that plays for Atlanta United. You leave Atlanta United and now you're just Jim. How do you change your life to suit who you really are? Because that's your identity. I grew up with so many kids that I knew that you're the kid who goes to, back then the academies were different, center of excellence, but you were the kid that went to Liverpool, you were the kid that went to Everton, and then all of a sudden you weren't. And nobody really knows who the kid is anymore because he never had any sort of life around that. You go to St. Louis, to the end result to be less than 1% of the academy kids to have a chance to make a living playing the game. By the way, that stat in England is 0.012% to make a living. And making a living is earning a few £100 a week in the lower leagues or just getting bus fare or whatever. That's such a small number. And you're talking about in a country with hundreds of pro clubs. Here we've got, I mean, how many times are you going to make a living? And by the way, when they get into like MLS, what are they on now? 60 grand?
Yeah, it's
Who
not very much.
Grand these days? You can't live on that.
Yeah.
So what are we fighting? What are we moving for? And what are we trying to accomplish? You've got the best opportunity right here in your doorstep. You've got a pro club here that, by the way, will spot you. As we tell kids at our club all the time, the amount of players that we send after U13, after U14, after U15. And by the way, those are the ones that normally end up staying. They're not the ones that went in at 11 and 12.
No.
It's the ones that went in at 15, 16. They stay, they get off to a D1 college, or in the case of one or two, they get that opportunity to play in the first team or be around the first team. But it's so few and far between. We just got to step back and take a dose of reality and go, it's your dream and you don't need to break it, but there has to be something else. There has to be.
Yeah. So what would you say, what's the message here to our families? Like, what should that other thing be? Why should their kids be playing sport? What's it really all about?
To me, I mean, you've got loads of values that come from playing sport, right? The teamwork and the camaraderie and the respect and all these different things. And that's always for me is, you know, is about, as a coach, the first thing I want to do is try and develop the player first, right? For the reasons we just gave. Less than 1% is going to go pro and make a living play. They're likely going to be doctors and lawyers and bricklayers and painters and all that.
Right.
Well, be respectful people when you do that. If we can teach that through sport, any sport, it's got a massive value. But to me, if what we just talked about, the first thing parents need to do is get out of their way. Just get out of their way and let them develop to become young men, young women. Let them step into their life as it's going to become. You can guide them and be advice for them when they get home, but the rest of it needs to be, what did the coach ask you? Did he ask you something during the session? What did you talk about during the session? Because I've got parents that, and you've seen them, fence huggers as we call them. They're right up against the fence. They're looking at your every move. And if that kid comes off sweating and drowning in sweat and exhausted and goes straight home to bed, they think that is success. And that's what success looks like. But ask them, what did you learn? What did you talk about? What points did you get from the session? That's got way more value. And sometimes it can be just, I learned to, encourage my teammates. I learned to talk to my teammates. I learned to be positive. I just mentioned I love the age groups, 12s and 13s, but there's such negative. Everything's like, oh, no, they have that long, whiny syllables at the end. Like, what are you doing? That one where it just goes on forever. I know you've heard it, boys. It drives you nuts. And my goal a lot of times in a session is just to change that. You can be a leader. You're right. Your words are right. What you're saying is, what he just did was crap. But there's a way to tell him it was crap. Because you've got to have the players driving the session, right? At the end of the day, I can help them and guide them into them. But when they step over the white line on a Saturday, they've got to drive each other. They've got to tell each other they can do better or work harder, or that pass wasn't good enough for your level, or whatever it is. But the whining thing does. So even if it's something like that in a session that I learned today to encourage my teammates, or talk to my right back and make him tuck in a little bit more, or get him to get him to step up a little bit. I think those things have more value than anything. Parents don't need to say, hey, I watched you tonight and you didn't do this, this, and this. If you watched and they didn't work hard enough, they were misbehaving and they weren't watching and they weren't paying attention, that's a parent conversation. Right. But to me, the rest of it is let them get in there, get out of the way, let them make the mistakes. And at the end of it, you get what you get. These kids are going to make it in spite of you and me, or they're not going to make it in spite of you and me. That's the bottom line for me.
Right. Yeah, it's a great message. I love that. It's a great way to end. So thanks so much for being here, Karl. It was
Yep.
great to have you,
Anytime.
and you shared so many excellent insights. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening today. If you're looking for more practical advice for parenting your athlete, check out my new ebook, Let Them Play, a no-nonsense guide for parents. It's available on Amazon for Kindle and on our website. Links in the show notes.